Yeah, gotta aim for the top like, hold up. Yeah, I can never doubt myself, I know better. All of you critics be acting like you know better. Blowing the smoke, but I know when the dust settles that I'm in my element. It's evident that there's levels to the game.
So what's happening, people? Welcome back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. Today it is just the duo as Justin is tied up. As we said, some days it could be me and Reed. Some days it could be Justin and Reed. Who knows? It depends on scheduling, but we're always going to be here to talk about the topics or topic for today. And the topic at hand for us today is these new roster caps that have been released, something that we knew was coming as they continue to release more and more tidbits from this House versus NCAA case. And to kind of set the groundwork, let's, put it out there that none of these things are set in stone yet. Not even the verdict of the case, not even the settlement is set yet, because all parties still have to agree on it. So until all parties agree, all these things that they are releasing, while they have agreed upon them, they have not signed it and signed any of the documents or put anything, put it on wax, as they say. So as of right now, these things are, just kind of stepping stones that they've already put together, and what things could be and most likely will be once all parties agree to it. But let's, Rita, I want to go to you just to get your initial thoughts on when you heard the new roster cap and the new scholarship caps that they're putting on these college sports. Potentially it's coming in 2025, 2026.
Yeah, I love the preface that you put on there because to be honest, I'll be curious if we go back and listen 2 months, if, all of this is still what they say it is. But,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny. I think, the article that you and I both read that kind of broke down, what those caps are going to look like and some of the impact that Title IX it's going to have and some of the tiering stuff. We're going to talk about all that today, I'm sure. But it's sort of this weird kind of like you see some stuff and it makes you smile, and then you kind of get a little farther down and it kind of makes you go like, oh, geez. And
Yeah.
it's this weird kind of almost roller coaster feeling as you look through there, because you talked about it before we kind of jumped on. There's kind of this good, bad, and ugly component of this whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
and the first thing you see right off the bat is the good, right? We have this additional chunk of scholarships that are going to be available at the Division I level, primarily for, they talk about the kind of the big five they're talking about are football, basketball, men's and women's volleyball, and then softball, baseball. Those are the sports that they're kind of emphasizing, but that's, millions of dollars in support
Yeah.
for these kids and the ability to come and play. And on the surface, man, that is awesome. And then you start to think about, okay, how are we going to fund this? And
Mm-hmm.
where's that going to come from? And who can truly fund this, right? Because even today, I mean, you look at the colleges that are out there. I mean, not all colleges fully fund all scholarships available. There's just not enough
Yeah.
money in the pot to do it. And I think that's even something that a lot of people don't key in on, right? I mean, when we ask our kids to reach out to schools and connect with them, you have to ask these schools, hey, are you fully funded? Do you have enough money to pass along to different kids and whatnot? And so
Yeah.
on the surface, this is great, and I really do think it's great. But you think about the teams that can actually maximize it, and it is a little bit of a, the rich keep getting richer kind of mentality. And I don't know what it really even means for those G5 and below teams. Can they even sustain that model? Can they pay for those teams? Do they focus on a certain sport or a certain set of sports, but then leave others to sort of rot in the wind, if you will?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a really good natural place to pass it over to you, as it pertains to some of that tiering and some of the things that we're seeing coming in on the other side of this.
Yeah, and it was a couple of weeks ago. I also have a wrestling show where we talk all about nothing but college and international wrestling. And one of the other guys on the show with me said he had talked to a friend of his that works in administration, and to prepare for a lot of these things, and he said this before this article came out where they talked about tiering all their different sports. He said to prepare for it, they were already doing that. So kind of a pre-tiering system that they were putting in place for their sports on these campuses. And now it comes out that they truly are doing that to figure out what that funding is going to look like. And as you said, they're, baseball, softball, and football, are among those big sports that are going to get a huge boost. Football going from 85 to 105. You think when you truly look at it, there's only, even though you get 105, there's only going to be a certain amount of schools that can truly fill that 105. And you said when you initially see it, you think, oh great, this means more money, this means this means that. But one of the caveats is that you have to opt into this rev share pie now. And with opting into this in this new rev share way of thinking, or at least this new rev share kind of umbrella that's going to be over the NCAA, you then get these roster caps. If you don't opt into it, I think it kind of stays the same. There's not really a change or anything for you. So there's a lot of different moving pieces and a lot of things that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. But when you do look at it, you know, and you get down to kind of brass tacks, and you do pick out some of these details, there is a ton of money that is going to have to be allocated to all these different schools. On top of this, with the new roster caps and scholarships, and specifically speaking of football, where they now have 105, they also have unlimited coaching staffs that are going to come into play here. So while you're trying to fund the scholarships, you're also going to try and fund the staff. And you can have an analyst job and now coach these athletes. So I think by opening up the staff part of this, you're saying, okay, well, if we're giving them more players, we have to give them more staff. So we're not going to truly change anything from what it is. We're just going to allow them to hire more staff, give them an analyst role, and in part, give them the responsibility of also coaching, so that the same amount of coaches aren't just talking to more athletes. So that was one of the things that came to mind for me. But then also, like I said, I'm in the wrestling world and I'm in that Olympic sports world, as all of us are right now, currently Olympic sports fans of the Olympics happening. But, I kind of live it 365, not just every 4 years, like a lot of people do. You start to think, what's going to happen to these Olympic sports? And the Olympic sports, which I'm sure these administrations are calling the non-revenue generating sports, because they're a line item more than anything for a lot of these schools, they're going to start to falter. They're going to start to be looked at as, okay, well, how can we allocate these funds from the 30 scholarships over here to the staff over here on football, or to the, now, what is it, 34 scholarships for baseball, right? And not for nothing, even though we have these really large, grandiose numbers, you do not have to fill each one of these scholarships. So even though everybody's saying, great, football gets 105, I doubt that there are going to be 105 guys on a team. They might bring in 105, but they might start to cut them down, which you ultimately had to do and have to do for travel, on the NCAA level anyway. You can't take 105 guys on a trip. That doesn't happen. There's an NCAA allotted number. And I think for us, once we made it to the playoffs in Division III, we had to chop it down to like 52 or 53 guys. Which I think is normal for Division I, where there's only about 50 some guys that are traveling. So ultimately, what I feel is happening is the professionalizing of the NCAA, where they're going to have, and they already do have, just practice squad players, but now you're going to have full practice squad teams that are able to practice with these guys. And you're not worried about whether a guy gets hurt or anything else, because it's true practice guy. Not just a redshirt guy you're hoping comes back next year, which happens right now. But on that wrestling side and on that Olympic sports side, like I said, they now go from specifically in wrestling, 9.9 scholarships to 30. And women's wrestling had 10 full scholarships. They now also go to 30. Now, women's is still in its infancy right now, so there's not a ton of teams. Iowa is the number one team when it comes to it right now, mostly because these other schools haven't even formed teams yet. Lehigh will have a team at some point. I know Arizona State wanted to have a team. They were working towards it, but doesn't look like they're probably going to get there, as their number one wrestler, who is an Olympian and will be wrestling next week, is leaving Arizona State to go to Iowa to wrestle. Since Iowa truly has like a fully formed program right now, on the Division I level. So, but when you look at it and you say, okay, well, that's great. Wrestling, they need 10 wrestlers on a wrestling team, 30 guys in the room. That means they have 20 extras. They have guys for partners. They have, you have a second tier. But then you're like, wait a second. That means they're actually going to have to do cuts, because there's some wrestling teams that have an excess of 30. Most of them have an excess of 30 guys, over 30. Oregon State, for instance, has, or I think, around 45, 42, 45 guys, something like that. So if that's going to happen, you're going to have to do cuts. But like I said before, that comes with opting into this model of rev share. When you opt into the rev share, you opt into that roster cap of 30. If you do not opt into the rev share, if you're one of those schools, you don't have to opt into the roster cap of 30. And then you can still leave. And ultimately, if you do, you can still leave a couple of spots open on your roster for walk-ons and things like that. So they didn't totally get rid of walk-ons, but they truly did make this happen because football would hit their threshold of 85, like, what was it, Miami, or I think it was Florida, did this year with Cormani McLean, who transferred from Colorado to go there. They're like, well, we already have 85. Let's just give him a lucrative NIL deal. He can pay for his schooling out of his NIL deal, and we can get him on the team. And they put him on as a walk-on. A former 5-star recruit out of high school is a walk-on at this school. So I think that was part of the reason why they wanted to kind of thwart these things and not allow, a 5-star to be a walk-on on any of these teams. But like you said, the good, bad, and ugly, there's great opportunity in here, but there's also the holy crap, what's going to happen to the non-revenue generating sports. And that was just my thought. And then obviously Title IX, that they have to abide by, because if they do one thing with the left hand, which is men's sports, they have to do the other thing with the right hand, which is women's sports. And then the last thing, and I'll turn it back over to you, for me, is if there are going to be these roster caps, if you are going to opt into rev share, you're going to have, for wrestling, say 30 guys. I feel like that, then one, the transfer portal is going to be a little bit more insane, as a trickle down effect. But two, you're going to have more guys going to lower tiered teams. So Penn State's obviously number one. Oklahoma State is another big one. There's a number of other very big teams. Iowa, that's in there, that gets a lot of the top recruits. And there are people that want to go to these schools to compete and be on these teams. If that's going to be happening, where they have to make cuts and they can't hold these guys on the team anymore, these guys and girls are going to look to move to other schools. Maybe they end up going Division II, going Division III, or just going to a school that is still Division I that has the space for them. Right. So it's going to, the good in my mind is that you're going to have guys that are leaving these schools and able to compete at other schools instead of being a backup at a Penn State or at a Michigan or at some of these other top tier schools. So that was my thought as well, when all these things started to kind of come to fruition and when they released these numbers. But I want to pose the question for you, as somebody who looks at admissions on kind of on a daily basis, the way that you do. What do you think this happens for admissions? Do you think that, since there's going to be roster caps, even though these numbers have exploded in certain sports, do you feel like the roster caps are going to drop admissions at all?
If anything, I think if schools, go through and choose to fund those higher caps, in my mind, it would increase admission, because now the biggest factor that most families have in going to college is that cost.
Mhm.
So if you are eliminating that cost for a larger number of students, that's 25 less people, 30 less people that you have to have that financial aid conversation with. Now, if they can get that scholarship, it opens up an even wider pool of folks that you can offer that money to and expand and see different opportunities for. To your point though, on the it's with the good portion of being able to take that additional scholarship money, go somewhere else, transfer, have that opportunity. On my side for high school, I see it kind of on the other side of that sword, in the sense of I'm probably going to have more kids and we're probably going to see more kids taking opportunities at schools to be that 90th scholarship,
Mhm.
where if we all really sit down and look at the depth chart and we see where everybody stands, not to say that, there's always opportunities to improve, there's always opportunities to make a difference. But if you come in on the depth chart number 90, it's going to be really hard to tell that kid not to take that free education, take that free money. But are we setting them up to immediately go into the transfer portal? And, is that kid getting picked up simply to not go somewhere else, as a strategy component? Or, hey, we've got it, we may as well spend it. We'll stick them over in the corner. If it works out and we get lucky, great. If not, I'm not worried about it. And now you've got a kid who may have had an opportunity to be a contributor somewhere, but we've blurred the lines of who really wants somebody from a scholarship versus who is just willing to pay that extra cap and keep them on the side and see what's going on. And I can see how that sounds like a bit of a first world problem, right? At the end of the day, if you get free education, like, that's pretty sweet. It's hard to say no to that.
Mhm.
But I do think you run the risk of these kids, because they are so competitive, because they sort of exist in this ecosystem, whether it be football, baseball, whatever, you know, we run the risk of those kids going to 2, 3, 4 schools, and by the end of it, they're out of eligibility. They can't tap into that money anymore because the NCAA says, "Hey, no more." But they've still got 2 years of classes they need to take because stuff didn't transfer when they went from here to here to here to here. And again, at that Division 1 level and at that Power 5 level, I even see it too. There's a lot of kids that just are not, that's not the priority. That's not what they're
Yeah.
really focused on. They're more focused on finding a financial advisor or finding a lawyer and somebody to kind of help them navigate through a lot of this. But man, you can be at that Division 1 level, but if you're number 90 on that roster, like, we need to pay attention to what is going to happen after school is done. And I think we run the risk of putting a lot of kids in purgatory just because they see that number and they see that scholarship, and that's what they've been told the goal is, building up on this whole side. So, again, I think depending on which lens you come at it from, could be good, could be tricky, hard to kind of manage on that. But, we talk about these caps and we talk about these things. The numbers here, at just sort of those major quote unquote revenue, I guess, sports we could say that we're talking about, if they just fully fund those sports, they're looking at almost $30 million
Mhm.
additional in cost in the athletic department. And that's just for the cost of the scholarships and the cost for the rev share.
Yeah.
So that's not considering the additional staff, the additional support, all the hidden costs that go in. Realistically, what schools can do that? And it's the ones that exist in that P4 area. Everybody else, from what I understand, I mean, if I look at these numbers and I look at what that would do and what I would have to owe on the rev share opt-in side, I mean, I don't know how many schools are really going to do that, right? I mean, yeah, Oregon, Phil Knight's basically said, "Hey, I'll fall over and give you whatever money's in my pocket," which is more
All
than
of it.
anybody will make. Yeah, all of
Unlimited
it. Take it.
NIL.
So I imagine Oregon's probably a team that's going to opt into this, because
Yeah.
why not? You have that guy going after it. Jerry Jones could fall over tomorrow and just, like, whatever change he has or whatever card happens to be in his pocket, he could probably fund whatever he wanted to at Arkansas and give them an opportunity to compete, right? So there's going to be schools and there's going to be programs that are able to do that. And I think you're going to see it at that P4 level, because that's really where this money exists. I really do think that it's a lot of big change, but it's a lot of big change for a very small percentage of college sports. I think for the vast majority of college sports, they're going to look at this deal and go, "I'm not going to opt in to do this rev share piece." Even, I mean, you think about those G5 and below Division 1 schools that even said, like, "We didn't want to even be in this lawsuit in the first place. Like, you guys
Exactly.
drew us in and tried to make us pay for this crap, and we didn't want to do that. We weren't the ones that did this. We weren't the schools that were named in the lawsuits. Like, this is ridiculous." And so if they see this and they see that, oh, if I just don't take my extra 15 scholarships for my baseball team, which I can't afford anyway, and I don't have to opt into the rev share program, why would I do that? But that gives me no benefit. And so to me, it really is just it appears to just be a program that was built in to give more financial power and freedom to those P4 programs to make that a more competitive environment, to up whether it be TV costs or rights deals or whatever. And to be honest with you, as a fan of college sports, like kind of excited to see what that looks like whenever
Yeah,
they can make these super teams, right? It would be unethical. It would be wrong of me to say that I'm not curious about how that's going to improve that. But I also
exactly.
think it's important to voice to families and voice to other athletes and everybody in between that this is still going to be the exception to the rule, just like Power Five, Power Four sports have been the exception to the rule forever. That hasn't looked like traditional college sports in some time, as much as we want to say that it has in a lot of the sports in a lot of the areas. It's just becoming more and more split from what sort of everybody else has when it comes to this. That's my personal feeling on it.
Yeah. And when I look at it through two lenses here, right? And I agree with you that tuition, or not tuition, but admissions will go up when it comes to the athletes. It has to, right? There's more scholarships that are up for grabs. But that means that the normal student admission is going to decrease. It's going to have to. There's more in this bag now, and now there's less in this bag. So you're going to decrease tremendously on your engineering students that come in to be engineers. You're going to decrease on your media department, on your communications students, right? Like there's going to be less when it comes to that, because the purse strings have to open up for this big bag of money seeking athletes, and less for the ones that are coming in to get the education. So just the education by itself. So that's, as you said that, I was thinking, well, if it increases in one part, that means that looking at it like a Libra scale, it's going to be lighter on the other side of it. It just has to. So, those scholarship athletes need to also be reminded, if you're coming in that 90th scholarship on the team, remember that's only for 1 year. So you may have a full year, a full ride, but your full ride isn't truly for 4 years. It is a 1 year contract. I have seen athletes get their full ride taken away after 1 year of being there as a red shirt, because remember, there's another crop of student athletes coming in behind you to take your spot, whether that's a scholarship spot, a roster spot, a spot on the depth chart, your jersey number, your locker. They're coming in to replace you completely on the team if they can, and that's just how things work for athletes. So literally every year you have to show out or get out or get off the field. And now you become a backup. So you may be able to continue to keep that scholarship if you're in that 1% on the team that sees every offensive play or every defensive play, or you're a special teams guy or whatever. You're going to keep that. But the kid that sees, oh, there's now 105 scholarships that are up for grabs at my dream school of going to UT, and I always wanted to play UT football. I always wanted to put on that burnt orange jersey. Now I get a chance to, because, Steve Sarkisian is sitting in my living room and he's telling me how much he wants me. And he's telling me right now that I have a full ride, or I have a full scholarship if I go there. I'm going to go. And it's the quality of your college life that is up for grabs now, where you get there. And that's the thing that, even for me as a D3 athlete, when I got there, I was like, all right, what does this look like? You get on the field, life is completely different, right? So your quality of college experience is now kind of on the chopping block, essentially, when you're that guy that is not on the depth chart, but you have a scholarship to go to school and play football in quotes for people that are just listening to this, air quotes, for UT, but you're truly not making an impact. And now you're getting up for meetings, you're, doing all the same thing that the team is doing, but at the expense of what? Your college experience. So certainly rethink just being that guy that gets one of those 90 scholarships and is happy to be part of the team. If that's for you, I'm not gonna, don't let me hold you, right? Like if that's what you want that experience, then you go right ahead. But that's just where we differ, right? I don't join a team to sit and watch. It's hard to just be on the sidelines watching a game. And if that and you didn't play for the number of years that you played in high school to get recruited to just have a front row seat every Saturday or Saturday or Friday night or whatever else to watch the future NFL prospects just to say that you were there. So make sure you're fully looking at what these contracts are, make sure you're fully looking at what these things look like and what your life would look like should you do this. Certainly, by all means, take the scholarship if you want to take the scholarship. I'm not trying to deter anyone's thoughts on this, but think about your impact, think about your quality of your college life. Does it improve, or are you just kind of a punching bag for the future NFL quarterback or future NFL linebacker, right? So as we are an athletes podcast and we are competitive people, you want to be out there on the field. So hopefully that shines through when you're picking the school that you want to pick, and you're not just saying, I want to go there because there is a scholarship that is open and I can go there and do the things that I want to do. But, everybody has different options, right? It's very different. Everybody's financials are very different, right? So, um, just make sure that you are picking the right school for you when it comes down to this, and doing what you need to do. But I will say that it is nice to see the number of sports that now have increase in their scholarships where they can have more opportunity, and hopefully that follows with more funding. I doubt that fencing is going to get more funding, right? I don't know how much golf is going to get more funding as they go from, what is that, 4.5 scholarships down to 9 or up to 9. So they're doubling the golf team, but like hopefully there are donors that are behind these teams, which happens a lot in wrestling specifically, where you have these NIL collectives where the donors are coming in and pushing money in. Hopefully these donors continue to do the same, and these schools decide that, yes, this is a way that we can fund these sports and make sure that we are funding these teams is by the donors coming in and doing what they do. So, but yeah, like I said, good, bad, and ugly in all of these things. I'm just hopeful that the opportunities are still there for any of these athletes that want to pursue any of these schools, and that they don't lose out, and that the schools don't start to cut these programs because they need to fund the football program, the basketball program, the baseball program, even though we see that happen almost every year. I can remember when Stanford was trying to cut a number of sports, and people were scratching their heads saying, well, specifically in wrestling, well, you want to cut wrestling funding, or you want to cut wrestling specifically, but they're an endowed sport. So it's your argument doesn't hold water here when you're trying to say that you're trying to save money or divert money from wrestling into another sport where they're a fully endowed sport. So you don't have to really truly worry about those things. So, but no, I just truly hope that the Olympic sports get the support that they need, that they can continue to stick around, and that we don't see things fully change. At least in regard to the support that they're getting. I hope that they get more, but what's ultimately going to happen is if these schools do opt in, they will have to start making roster cuts because, you can't have more than 30 if you're doing rev share. And I can understand that's the, um, why that's the ultimatum, because they need to know how much money they're going to be spending and what they're going to be doing. The other part of this that I wonder is what happens to tuition prices now that this is a thing. Do you think that there's going to be a change in tuition prices? I mean, every single year tuition prices change. Most of them skyrocket to the point where most people are being priced out of education these days. But what do you think happens to tuition prices now that these scholarships are changing and you're going to have, say, your 105 football players who can all be on scholarship if they choose to max that out, and then an unlimited amount of coaches? The regular students that are coming in that aren't getting these full scholarships like your athletes are getting, they're essentially the ones that are paying for their education. And you want to bring in a certain amount of money for the education, even though you are getting this mass amount of revenue coming in because the football team is good. Say it is a Georgia, where Georgia now brings in all these 5-star players and they've got unlimited coaching staffs. But then you look and you're like, okay, well, where's the tuition money going to be coming in? Because that's still a line item you have to worry about. What do you think happens to tuition? Goes up, goes down, changes in any way?
You know, when I think about that, to me, I don't think they could afford to really go crazy with that. I do think that there's going to be sort of a balanced approach to, I mean, every year tuition goes up because that's just how the capitalist college process is.
How the world
And
works.
we continue to convince people that everybody, needs one and it costs this and XYZ and whatnot. So it's always going to continue to go up. But I think the sharp increase, I think that's going to be fewer and farther between, only because, I would argue that you can make the argument that this additional scholarship money is essentially additional marketing money
Mhm.
for certain schools, depending on what you want to fund, depending on what you hope the outcome is. You think about a TCU making a run to the national championship. We talked about the effect that games and moments have on admissions rates and potential money out. I mean, there's no secret that sports are the best marketer in the world when it comes to schools and their impact. So I can see where colleges would want to kind of double down on that. I think the risk you run into is if you choose to fund these schools with the thinking being, well, we'll just have the kids fund it for now, and then we'll get a bunch of people that want to come in and be a part of the school, and that will increase our enrollment, and that will take the burden off of the tuition, and we can slow the growth in tuition. I think that if you take that approach and if your team doesn't do great, if your team doesn't have that undefeated season, now everyone's looking around going, what in the world did we just do?
Mhm.
Like that people do not have the leash for that. Everyone already feels like they're overpaying for any college that they go to, whether it's private, in-state public, out-of-state public. Now you see this sharp increase, you know what it's going to, and you're not getting the results that everyone expected. That is a very quick way to lose your job. That's a very quick way to lose leadership. That's a very quick way to, we'll say, roll over, the direction of the university, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure if there are enough folks in leadership in these places that are willing to sort of gamble on that.
Mhm.
When it comes to making that decision on the backs of 18, 19, 20-year-old kids effectively. So, you know, I- to be honest, I don't know if there's enough people that have the moxie, if you will, to kind of take that risk and see if it's going to pay off. But what I do think is going to potentially happen is I think that because they are starting to increase these number of scholarships, especially in these other, all these teams, to your point that you made about kind of the overall demographic of schools and the pedigree of schools, I do think the admissions office may have sort of a readjustment period, if you will, with these programs and especially at that sort of high competitive Division 1 level where you hear about, UCLA is like a 9% admit rate, but if you write in, I am going to be the second string quarterback for UCLA football, they're like, man, you're in. I don't know. Like it's
Yeah.
crazy. Like you found, I think that that is going to become, maybe we do have that for the first 50 guys, but for the next 50 guys, hey, we'll bring them in and maybe we'll give them a little bit, but they've got to make sure they're maintaining the UCLA academic profile, at least within a margin that we can market so that we're not losing the marketability and the quality and the pedigree of what we are as a university to this sort of increased ability on the athletic side. And I don't think that, for a school that's that large, 50 guys or 50 girls are going to make a massive difference in that number, but it could be enough. And if nothing else, on a PR side, to go to the state of California and tell all these kids that have 4.6s and whatever it is and 1510 SATs that, hey, this guy down the street that you were buddies with who got a 3.2 GPA, which is the minimum to go to a UC school, is rocking it at UCLA, and you had to go down and find a private school because none of the UCs had space for you. That's going to get old fast, especially if people start to figure out where those caps are and how that money's being spent. So I could see a world where the admissions office comes back and says, hey, listen, we can give you these 50 and we can roll with you on that because we know that we've got to have that to make it work. But for these 20, we can only do this. For these 20, we can only do this. And for these kids on the tail end, you can give them a scholarship if you want, but they're going to have to get in on the merits of the admissions process. And that's how we're going to have to do this. And so I could see that being a part of the conversation. And I think, part of the reason for that is that I don't know if you saw, there was a stat that got released. I think it was last week or something like that. We were kind of passing it around, of the graduation rate of football programs. And you look at, as much as, I've got plenty of feelings on Dabo and his whole philosophy on like giving kids money, which I don't know why he's so against it, but he is. But their team has a 99% graduation rate. You look at Georgia, who's coming off of, national championship appearances, national championship trophies, arguably one of the hottest tickets in town as far as going and seeing them play, 41% graduation rate. And that's excluding transfers, and that's excluding draft picks. So you're taking away what is, I would argue, a large chunk of Georgia's football team, and still they're at 41%. For a school that is supposed to be so challenging to get into academically, right? We talk about it all the time, especially from an out-of-state perspective. That's embarrassing to see that number at the bottom. It really is. Like that looks terrible. And there's plenty of people that won't care because they'll keep winning and they'll keep chugging it out. But
that's what it's
the
about.
only things that I've seen about, exactly, but the only things that I've seen about Georgia in the last 3 months are you got a 41% admit rate and half the team's in jail. It feels like. Every time I see any article, it's someone's speeding, someone's doing X, Y. So like you can
24
only do
arrests
that
since last January is what I saw today.
Yeah,
that's just for like reckless driving, by the way.
Well, exactly. And then you think about, and I mean, even take it back, right? Like think about Tim Tebow and Urban Meyer and the boys at Florida when they were winning on those national championships. The only stat that I ever hear about now with that is that over 50% of the people on that roster have spent time in jail. Like I know more about that statistic than I do anything else. And regardless of the pedigree of your university, I mean, God, Florida's real hard to get into. Florida's a great university. Georgia's a great university. But that PR only goes so far. And when you think about the amount of money that's being funneled into that for a higher education institution, to your point, as people, you and I, massive, massive college sports fans, massive sports fans, former athletes, highly competitive, I understand the value of having those things, but I also understand that up to a certain point, the leadership at places are going to go, listen, we cannot do this anymore. There has to be some level of change in how these rosters are built, some level of change in how we manage kids being on or off these teams. It's just not sustainable for a long period of time. And I fear that if it becomes more and more of sort of that all money in, everyone gets a free pass if you get a scholarship, that can start to get a little bit dicey in some places and start to have a negative impact on the overall PR of university. So I'm curious how that's going to kind of develop over the next year or two and see if anybody makes any changes based on that.
Yeah. I feel like in my mind, right, if I'm the person worried about the financials, right? I'm part of the administration and I'm on the board or whatever else. I say, we allocate $5 million to football. And that takes care of their coaching staff, that takes care of their roster scholarships, that takes care of this, and this, right? 5 million for the whole season. I mean, I have no idea what the numbers are. I'm sure it's probably north of 5 million, right? But like, if you allocate a certain chunk of money to the football team and you say, this is what football gets, this is what, the volleyball team gets, this is what the fencing team, this is what the golf team gets, right? Because as they're tiering these different sports, you know that top tier is the $50 million tier, where they're worried about marketing, they're worried about tickets, coaching staff, player scholarships, player gear with anything that anything that the players get, rebuilding facilities. Because it's funny, as a Falcons fan, the Falcons just released their new locker room at Flowery Branch, their practice facility, and everybody's like, we've seen locker rooms like this at like every college there is in, every big Power 4 school has a locker room that looks like this. It's like, yes, because they have to worry about recruiting players to their teams. So that's where a whole big old chunk of money is going to go to these schools so that their facilities make their players feel like royalty, right? Like, there was another video that I watched of UT's locker room. If you're a former player at UT football, like Bijan Robinson, he's got a locker there because he comes back here to train in the off season. So he has a locker in the locker room that will never go away as long as he comes back here to train. Right. So like, the football teams are able to spend this absorbent amount of money on basically their facilities and whatever else they need. So if I'm thinking that administrations might start to look at it and say, okay, we're going to allocate, 50 million to this team for everything throughout the entire year. We're going to allocate, this next tier gets 10 million. This next tier 5 million, right? Like, the lowest tier is a 5 million, $3 million cap. That's what I think of when they're tiering out these schools and these sports. This is a very big chunk of money for these types of players, and what the publicity shows these types of players are going to need and what these coaches are going to need to bring them in. So let's make sure that they get that, and recently, and it's obviously a big deal in wrestling. David Taylor is now the head coach at Oklahoma State. It's a state school, so the one journalist in wrestling covers all Oklahoma sports, did the Freedom of Information form, got his contract, and he did the same for the last coach as well. Got his contract, and it's like $1 million a year. He gets an annual raise every year, and this is kind of unheard of. It's not something that happens in wrestling, where head coaches are getting $1 million a year. Doesn't happen. So if those are the kinds of contracts that are going to start to come in, and obviously there was a very big donor that allocated like 40 mil or something like that, and like a private plane, there's a whole bunch of bells and whistles that are in there. But those are the people you're going to have to look at. You're going to have to look at your big name alums like Phil Knight, who's going to be giving Oregon everything under the sun for their football team to win a championship. I'm still in the midst of reading his book right now, Shoe Dog, because obviously I'm a Nike sneaker guy, but I'm reading about this, and like the duck blood runs deep in that man. And I'm not surprised at all that he's saying, I'm going to give this amount of money to Oregon because I just want to see them win a championship, right? Like, NIL, whatever you need. Who needs a shoe deal? Who needs new apparel? You already have brand new different uniforms for every week of every game. What else do you need? We're going to allocate it because I want to see Oregon win a championship. And while the head coach is saying, great, we have unlimited NIL, he should honestly be saying, oh crap, we have unlimited NIL to win a title now. Because the minute that he doesn't win a title, they're going to be looking for somebody else. Because there's now a new follow the money in all of this, where if the person that is, signing those checks doesn't like who's coaching doesn't like what's going on, you better believe that there's going to be some change that comes into play. So, like I said, I think when it comes to the tier system, you're going to have to factor in a bunch of different things, and people are going to be worried about how much money is going into these programs, how much money are the students getting. There's going to be a lot more big dollar signs that are going to be getting thrown around over these next years. And that's my thought. I'll give you the final thought on this topic of what you feel is going to happen, or what your thoughts are on this entire thing, good, bad, or ugly.
Yeah, I think, the might even be just the boring take, if we're being honest. I'll call myself out on that. But, I think two things. One, I think that for anybody out there, don't want to say old heads, but old head, that think this is going to like ruin college sports. It's not, for
No.
two reasons, in my opinion. One, college sports are still college sports, and the way that you want to consume college sports, this is just making it better. This is making it more competitive. This is putting more on the line. This is making it more grandiose. None of those people that think college sports are getting killed, or whatever it is, I don't see any of them showing up to Sam Houston State and watching an FCS game. I don't see any of them showing up to Central Connecticut State and watching a volleyball game.
Yeah.
I see them wanting to go to Rocky Top. I see them wanting to go to the big house. I see them wanting to go and be in that fanfare and be in that environment and see all this fireworks and see all the grandioseness. That's what this thing builds. That's what this is. And so it's not killing college sports, it's changing it. It's different, looks different. And yeah, there's some tweaks in here. And yeah, do I love that Phil Knight isn't giving my team that I love all the dollars in the world and giving it to their team? Nah, I mean, like, that's going to probably stink whenever they start crushing us or whatever. Like, sure, that's part of it. And that's part of working this piece out. But college sports are still college sports at the end of the day. There is a finite and a very distinct percentage of it that is evolving in a different way because the market has demanded it. And we're seeing what that looks like, and we're figuring that out in real time. And it's exciting to watch that. And sometimes it's frustrating to watch that. And sometimes you look and go, how did we get to this answer for this? But it's working itself out. And at the end of the day, if you want that traditional true college experience, it's not going anywhere. There's 4,000 colleges out there. There's 1,500 NCAA institutions. Just because your school or the school you've cheered for doesn't look exactly the same as it did, or there's a dollar sign behind the guy who's putting up all the numbers that you've been cheering for the last 10 years, doesn't mean it's different. Doesn't mean it's bad or wrong or change. It just means that it's different. It means that it's evolving. And so I think that, the constant reminder for all of this is like, yes, it's all changing. Yes, it's all improving. Yes, things are different, but college sports are not going anywhere. And that is a good thing.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, as always, enjoy the conversation with you, Reid. Love the nuance that you bring to the conversation. And with that, we're going to close out today's show. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks to talk about some other new topic. Maybe we'll touch on this one here once again as things continue to develop with this House versus NCAA case. Probably the next time that we talk, this case will be completely closed because I believe it is today when this podcast is coming out, which is Friday, that everything is supposed to be coming in. So being approved and signed off on and totally close it out. But who knows what we will be talking about next, but keep it right here on the Athletes podcast, and we'll bring you enough news for your car ride.